Hello, a while ago I made a video on how misogyny helps nobody and isn't MGTOW. Shout out to everyone who watched that video, thanks for viewing it, but I think it's time I continue and make another video doubling down. This time explaining why misogyny, and thus by extension being a misogynist, is actually quite gynocentric and contrary to MGTOW. Let's begin. A refresher on gynocentrism first. Gynocentrism is an idea of centering women and putting them on a pedestal or focusing on them in particular versus anything else. We see this in many aspects of society and culture, and we tend to see this applied in effect in particular by simps, pickup artists, white knights, and also sometimes laws with the way alimony works within divorce in most cases. However, it also applies here in general, as it pertains to the over-focus on women when compared to anything else, and it applies regardless of if your focus or attention on women is positive or negative in nature. Anyways, how this pertains to the topic of this video is that over the past few months, I took some time to research both simping and misogyny, and I came to the conclusion that both are basically just two sides of the same coin, essentially two wings of the same bird, and that misogyny, and thus being a misogynist and hating women, is just as gynocentric as being a simp and a white knight. It's the uniparty. At its core, both suffer from the same basic problem. The fact that both lead you to be overly focused on women and thinking about nothing but them in any context, whether positive or negative, and thus making you elevate them, center them, and put them at the center and above everything else in your mind and train of thought, which would then be an obsession, which is the opposite of what MGTOW is for and advocates for, and intends for those following it to do. When the message of MGTOW, men going their own way, was created and thus spread everywhere online after that, the key emphasis in MGTOW, as it is called men going their own way, was to actually go our own way, and thus it is the going their own way part of the label that was the most emphasized and talked about, and the reason for this is simple. MGTOW was not intended to be used as the do-nothing and complain about women approach, as people many times describe it to be. It was intended, and still is, to be the permanent solution to the issues men, in particular in Western countries, face in terms of how divorce courts work with regards to alimony and child support, and things like common law marriage, and how to avoid that. The lessons for men on how to be men were already there from the start. MGTOW replaced every single course there was, and will continue to replace every single quote-unquote course that may exist in the future from now until the heat death of the universe. The solution is to simply be single. You may agree with it, you may not agree with it, however, this is the best solution that is confirmed to have wiped away every single problem with dating, relationships, and marriage that men have and could possibly have, and that also works universally regardless of wealth or any other factor. However, a lot of people, and I'm not going to name names, as it is a wide group of people, comprising many groups within the Manosphere and either adjacent to MGTOW or within it, have not understood this exact fact, and have developed as a result too much attention and care for women, with the only difference being that it is negative attention and negative polarization, i.e. misogyny, instead of positive attention such as simping and white knighting. This is not something I see as positive or good for anyone, and something that should be addressed. You can sort of understand it as a so-called red pill rage, if you take it as someone learning about these things and thus being unhappy that women are not this idealistic vision of people who can do no wrong that they imagined in their head or was drilled into them by others, but even that needs to be unlearned, as the point of MGTOW is to go our own way, not keep caring ad nauseum, just in a more negative manner instead of a positive manner. Now, another thing I want to address with this is the fact that a big chunk of the content about this subject, as well as about the Manosphere and MGTOW itself, is about women, And it's a fact that our detractors have used against us for years, despite the fact that there was some measure of justification for why that is the case. Many newer channels, myself included, wanted to make a name for themselves here in MGTOW, and thus talked about women just like the older and more prominent ones, with the focus being on the same subject, such as alimony, child support, no-fault divorce, false accusations, dating, relationships, and the point of marriage. And while all this content is good and helps everyone learn about MGTOW, at some point you have to wonder if the discussion is shifting too much towards discussion of women above everything else. And that is what me and many other MGTOWs have started to wonder, and is why I mention this point. Of course, one can consider that the MRAs, for example, have been supplanted by allowing in women, thus making the MRM, men's rights movement, about them, and thus putting them on a pedestal in terms of where our focus is directed. But the big question is that not what we are doing ourselves here when we make more videos about women instead of other subjects that would, in my opinion, be more useful and valuable to discuss? One has to consider the simple fact that simping and misogyny are simply two sides of the same coin, share the same flaws, and would result in problems if unchecked. Furthermore, putting women on a pedestal and giving them attention when they already generate a lot of it on their own as is, especially with channels that they make that happen to have the same talking points as we do, is incredibly unnecessary and superfluous in my viewpoint. There was a time and a place where such a thing was useful when teaching men how to deal with no-fault divorce, why it's stacked against them, and how to avoid them, how to avoid the problem. But beyond that, there is little use for it anymore, and I would want of all of us MGTOW content creators still out there, including myself, to agree to the principle of talking about our philosophy, values, society we live in, and our projects and ideas, and also about us men as a whole, and our experiences, more than we talk about women or the concept of female nature, quote-unquote, and I believe this should start today. Overall, I believe in this fundamental truth, and thus make this video to rest my case. The centering of women in areas where they do not need to be centered and is not about them is gynocentric. This involves putting them on a pedestal above everyone or everything else. We have seen this with simps, simping, and white knighting. But it is also seen with misogyny and thus misogynists, given how they, in their hatred of women, based on them being women, also keep centering women and keep putting them on a pedestal above everyone else, and thus holding them on different standards than others. If you center women, if you hold them up on a pedestal, regardless of if your viewpoints towards them are positive or negative, or if you're negatively polarized, you are a gynocentrist at heart, and that is the case. If you decide to be a misogynist who does nothing but hate women ad nauseum instead of going your own way and living life according to your own principles, you are nothing more than a gynocentrist. I want to make it clear that this cannot and should not go any further, and that nobody should be above this, be they MGTOW or not, and that in terms of MGTOW content creation, it is time to harken back to the core of MGTOW and the MGTOW message, as well as promote it and discuss it, as well as discuss men and society and how life is for us, instead of discussing women ad nauseum or having funny but ultimately still superfluous meme compilations, TikTok reactions, and etc. We must return to what made MGTOW great and what still makes it great today. And we must return to the MGTOW first vision and thus put ourselves first by making content that is about us first and foremost instead of anyone else. Finally, to give everyone an example, I want to address to everyone which actions I, yours truly, have taken as a MGTOW content creator to achieve the goals I listed and all of the principles I laid out here for content creation. Firstly, I improved the channel by having a newer version of my profile picture and introduced a newer content creation style, which is still seen with this video. Secondly, with this newer content style, I shifted discussion away from talking about women and shifted it towards talking about MGTOW itself and opinions I have of it, as well as also making videos about my Minecraft server and other tech-related stuff. And I will continue on my commitment to reach these goals. If I can do it, others can and also should. It is time to return focus to MGTOW. It is time to make MGTOW great again, and I will help lead this ideal forward. With that being said, this has been Igor MGTOW and Video Games. Like and subscribe and click the bell notifications on YouTube if you enjoyed the video, and follow me on odyssey.com, MGTOW.tv, Twitter, Blue Sky and Rumble, and join my Discord server, and bye bye. Thanks for watching.